Okay, hi everyone. It's 1 p.m. now, so I guess we can get started. But good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of At Pace, which is our People and Culture talk show hosted by the Institute of Organisational Dynamics, where we kind of come together, give you an unrehearsed and unfiltered perspective on some of the top workplace culture news stories from around the world. So my name's Chloe. I'm our guest host today, and I'm the Investigation Services Coordinator at the TCM Group. A really warm welcome and thank you to our guest speakers today. So we're joined by Harriette Wolf, who is our Head of Investigation, Mediation and Coaching Services at the TCM Group. We've also got Nick Snaith, who is there, but his camera's not working today. And Nick is our TCM Transformation Consultant and one of our investigators. And we've also got Kate Maddison-Greenwell of People Efficient Consulting. Kate's an independent people consultant specialising in employee experience and engagement. So all really keen to discuss 2 recent news stories, which you might have heard of already or read about. So that's the investigation in Cricket Scotland, which has found institutional racism, and also Amazon, who are under investigation for workplace safety issues. So I guess I'll open the floor now to our speakers, firstly to discuss Cricket Scotland and hear your thoughts. I'm interested to know what you think, first of all, this means for the world of sporting, this kind of finding. Just for a bit of context, the investigation found 448 examples of institutional racism, with 62% of employees having experienced, seen or reported racism in the time leading up to this. So, yeah, really interested to know what you think, first of all, this means for the sporting world.
Thanks, Chloe. Thanks for opening that up, Chloe. I think, you know, it's a really difficult topic, isn't it, for anybody to address. But I think really in the world of sport, it's becoming more and more apparent that racism, I guess, within the industry really needs to be addressed, and how they address it is crucial for the culture that they're creating for the athletes and the young athletes, I think, that are going into the industry, that are going into the sporting world. They really want to feel that they're going into an area that is going to support them, is going to represent them and their culture, and really give people, I guess, the sporting heroes that they want to look up to as well. You know, I think it's at the forefront of everybody's mind, and it's upsetting and it's concerning to see that these things are still happening within the various industries and within sport, when you do have such a young audience when it comes to sport. You know, obviously we're going to talk about how they can address it through the investigation process itself, how they're going to address it maybe moving forward. But I know, you know, it'd be interesting to hear, Kate and Nick, your thoughts around this as well.
Yeah, I think for me, you know, when you read things like that, you are reminded of just how important and how much representation matters. It matters to, you know, as you were saying, sort of at grassroots, it matters to attracting people to a particular industry, in this case, sporting. And it matters in terms of communication and culture as well. You know, as we all probably know, you know, investigations and action that's taken after an investigation is kind of a last resort. You know, in order to prevent things like this, we have to look at how occurrences like this start right from the beginning. So we have to look at the structure of the grassroots. We have to look at the structure of the bodies that look after industries such as you know, sport, cricket and what have you. You know, but really there has to be that big picture viewpoint, as well as obviously looking into particular occurrences. I don't know whether you agree, Nick.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting for me is, particularly when you talk about grassroots, is the link that that such a massive sport such as cricket, and you know, likewise we see it in football here in the UK. The links that they set out with engaging with education, with schools, etc., to create great harmony and partnerships. I think that also is a particular point where we start to talk about those tough conversations regarding racism. because it's not just a in-sport issue, it's throughout society, it's throughout industry, and it's only through time and education that these matters will change. So I think they go very much hand in hand with that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you. And I guess in your guys' experience, whether that's investigators or the other aspects of work that you do, what have you found is really important when you're conducting a fair and neutral investigation where there are really sensitive and complex issues?
For me, again, sorry to jump in there, but the primary word for me there is empathy and being able to, and it's really difficult in some ways because I'm afraid to say it, very on becoming a middle-aged white male, and a lot of the reports really, and work that I very much been involved in around ethnicity. It's really hard to be empathetic because it's how can I put my look through the eyes of another as such, but to have an appreciation of those social issues, of those torments that do occur and do exist, and then trying the best that I can be in being unbiased around in the subjects, around in the topics, to be able to do a fair and neutral investigation.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think it's really important when you're approaching something like this. I think that the first thing to consider is, am I the right person to conduct this? Have I got the right experience? Have I got the right insight? Are there any biases that I'm aware of? So I think that's the first check-in that should happen. If you are the right person, I think it's important to ensure that you have the right credibility in place to be able to explain to people that how you're going to conduct something, the reason why you are the right person, so that you can assure people of your neutrality. I think sometimes it can be really beneficial perhaps to come from an industry that is not the same. Maybe there's parallels, but to ensure real neutrality, I think that can be incredibly helpful. So if it was if it was an event or an issue, an investigation in the sporting world, perhaps to bring somebody in from a sector that's not sporting, I think that can be quite powerful. I don't know whether you agree with that, Harriette, or whether you've had that kind of experience of cross-sector investigations.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, actually, Kate, because you can take a step back. You can think about, okay, as an organisation, you need to consider various aspects. I think having an understanding of the sector definitely has benefits.
Yeah.
I think, you can understand then how certain things might work in the particular sector, but then if you're coming at it from a slightly different angle, you can step back. You can think, okay, you need to consider X, Y, Z. This potentially would support your employees in having more honest, open conversations. Various training might work that sector hasn't potentially thought about before. So I think, there's plus and minuses from both sides. I think what's really important, and whenever you're taking on an investigation, especially ones where we're looking at ED&I, you can really create that platform where the employee can share their experiences. Like you said, they feel comfortable, they feel confident to share their experiences with you as the investigator. And, I think that comes from creating that psychologically safe platform for them, knowing that you are impartial, you are neutral. The questions that you ask create a really safe space. We talk quite a lot about cognitive interviewing skills, and that allows the individual to feel comfortable to go through what maybe is quite a traumatic experience for them. So you're taking them back through various examples. I think if we look at the Cricket Scotland case again, one of the individuals, so one of the cricketers, said that at different times he was made to feel like he was a personal servant to other individuals, to other team members, to coaches. There were throwaway comments made to him, such as you should count yourself lucky to be here. And he said himself he'd never heard any other one of his white counterparts having similar comments made to him. So as the investigator, you've got to be able to almost kind of understand how that individual has been made to feel at that time, and be able then to assess, you know, again, what the impact of that behavior has been on that individual. Those throwaway comments in the moment have a really damaging, lasting impact on the individual. And that's really important for the investigator to consider as they're moving through a case, again, especially if we're looking at institutional racism as the example here.
Yeah,
I love that you brought up. I love that you brought up psychological safety, because that I think is if not the most important thing, both in an investigation, but also in any kind of culture. Because I thought it was quite interesting that that, you know, there are 448 examples of racism, and 68 there were 68 occurrences that were brought up during the review. So these things weren't brought up before. They were only brought up once somebody had asked the questions. And that's either because people didn't recognise the comments and the issues and what have you for what they were, or they did, but they didn't raise it. So I think, you know, Harriette's point about a psychologically safe environment is paramount, both in the investigation and within a culture. And that's something that leaders really should work hard to understand and know how to evoke that kind of environment.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, like you said there, Kate, about why these issues can take so long to be addressed, when the, you know, on the outside looking in, that you can see that they're prevalent by what's been quoted and what's been discussed. And I guess as part of TCM, when we're doing investigation reports, at least, recommendations form a really big part of that process in the final report. I guess, Harriette, you mentioned there earlier around training and awareness. What other kind of recommendations would you make or have made in the past in similar cases that you might have investigated into something that's this severe?
Yeah, I'll just quickly touch on that, and then I'll let Nick and Kate come in as well, because I'm sure, you know, there's been lots of recommendations that you have both provided as well. I think if we're looking potentially at the sporting industry, actually, I guess if we're looking at kind of any area here, I think a really important kind of talent pathway into the industry is really important. So actually, what are we looking for? So again, if we take the sporting industry, what talent are we looking for? And what's the pathway of allowing that talent to grow and to nurture within our industry? If you have those really clear talent pathways into the industry, you're setting the benchmark of the behaviours that you expect as well. So you're saying, we want to bring you in because of what you contribute to our club, to our industry. But then that's also going to reflect the wider culture of that particular sporting club, for this example. You know, that you want to nurture, you want to grow, you want to develop this talent regardless of the background, the culture, the various populations that they might have representing them. And then I think it also comes back to really clear processes that the organisation has in place as well. You need to be extremely clear of the behaviours that are expected, the benchmark of the behaviours there, and really clear processes to support people. So if somebody doesn't feel supported or treated as an equal within that industry, they know where they can go for that support. They know how they can call out the behaviour, and that actually the organisation is going to hear them, is going to take it seriously and put actions in place to help them move forward. It's not enough to say, you know, we have a whistleblowing helpline, or, you know, you can raise your complaint this way. They've got to know that when they raise that complaint, it's going to be treated with respect, and there's going to be that support in place for them to help them move forward and to address the behaviour. Nick, Kate, anything for yourself there?
Yeah, I think I agree with Harriette, and I've just recently done an investigation with similar sort of recommendations. And I think, for me, in all the roles I've ever undertaken with whatever organisation I've had, I've never really had an induction to really clearly define what the behaviours and values are expected by that organisation. And so the entry point into whatever, you know, whether or not it be a sporting club, whether or not it be a place of work, with any groups. I think if the organisation itself is clearly defined, and because I think there's an onus of the organisation to understand itself what it expects of its employees, or in response to a sporting club of its members, to clearly define what those behaviours and values are, and then impress on those individuals at the entry point to say, well, this is what we're all about. And if you're not going to adhere, you don't like the way that we work, then I'm sorry, but this isn't the club for you. And I think by having that managed starting point and having somebody to articulate it, other than can you go and research for yourself on our intranet site what we talk about in respect of EDI, I don't think that's good enough. I think it needs some good input, some good training, and a good starting point for that individual.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I also think it's important to have a good starting point. But often to get that right starting point, you have to start from the end. So sometimes when I'm working with leadership teams or with businesses that are struggling in this area, I start with the impact. So I start with the outcome and what it looks like when it's not right and what it looks like when it is right. You can start to work backwards and say, okay, so what behaviours would then contribute to the right impact and what behaviours would contribute to the wrong impact? And then you can start to look at the values and what have you, which sounds like a strange way of doing things. But if people aren't aware of how their behaviours can contribute to a bad impact or a bad outcome, such as has been highlighted with Cricket Scotland and with Amazon, if people aren't aware of that and how little things all contribute to a much bigger problem, then they won't really understand what the values mean, and they won't really understand why it's important. As Nick was touching on, lots of companies have values, lots of companies understand the importance of values, but they don't then take the next step, which is talking about what behaviours represent and reflect those values, and then looking at role modelling them and just how important it is, because all it takes is for one leader to not be role modelling it and for their team to then mirror what that leader is doing, and it can quicker than you would think, it can come crumbling down. And I've seen it, and I'm sure that the rest of you have seen that too. So it is important to as a leader to keep ourselves in check and to keep ourselves challenged, but also to be comfortable to challenge other people and to say the behaviour that you displayed, is that contributing to the outcome that we want? And it comes with experience and how to phrase that in a kind way. But I think that's something that I would look at. What is the impact, and then you can work your way back to, okay, so how do we start this right from the beginning?
Yeah, and I think on that. Sorry, go on, Nick. Go on.
I was going to say it's really, really a really great point, that, Kate. And just to put a little bit of a personal experience on it, in 1993, McPherson wrote the report about the Metropolitan Police being institutionally racist after the death, the tragic death of Stephen Lawrence. Yeah. 2 years later, as a fresh young gent from the north, joining the Metropolitan Police and having been labelled as somebody who was institutionally racist, were quite impactful on me in myself. And this is where we go. What the impact is at the end, and how it affects you in the beginning. And to be honest, the Metropolitan Police at that time were still learning on how to address new starters, how to address current employees. But to be labelled institutionally racist, and if I'm brutally honest, I didn't have a clue what institutionally racist was. I didn't know what that meant. I had my own personal values. I came as a young person who wanted to do good for the public, and that's why I joined the police. But it really, really was a damaging label, as I would imagine all those people who are now part of Cricket Scotland to be labelled as institutionally racist. And although it's an organisational phrase, you do as an individual take it personally, very, very much so, and it is and it is quite disheartening, very much so.
I think that's a really 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 important insight there, Nick. And I think kind of touching on from what both of you have said as well, it's about the behaviour that needs to be addressed and the behaviour that you witness as an individual as well yourself. And I think things like training and awareness around what it means to be an active bystander is really important. So actually, you know, we understand what we expect, or we want to share that understanding of what behaviours we expect within our organisation. So again, this is kind of behaviour that we say is acceptable, behaviour that we say is not acceptable. Okay? And then if you're on the other side of that, you can understand that, you know how it makes you feel, but then you've got your colleagues around you. Okay, if they're witnessing things like that, it's not okay for them to just stand by and let that happen. So they need to be aware that they can address it, they can bring things up. If it makes them feel uncomfortable, then that needs to be addressed as well. So I think that active bystander training awareness is really important as well. You know, we don't just stand by and let this happen to a colleague of ours, or, you know, volunteer, potentially if it's happening on at board level. It's things that we need to address across the organisation.
And if we bring it to the Amazon subject, and sort of workplace safety, which you know is also quite troubling, I think it's calling out you know, that the whole neutrality thing, you know, having somebody that can come along and is neutral, whether that's because they're not part of that department, or because they're not part of that sector, or because they don't belong to that particular organisation. It can be really impactful to actually challenge and ask why multiple times, because if you're part of that business, you don't ask why, because it's just something that you know. And something that I did an investigation a few years ago now into accidents and near misses in a manufacturing environment, and there was quite a clear trend when I actually was asking, you know, why do people report in a certain way, and who is it that looks into these. It was the category of whether something was an accident or a near miss came down to just two people that had been there for a long time. And it was really, it was quite obvious when you looked at it, but there was a clear pattern of when a face fits, a bump, if somebody had bumped a forklift truck, for example, if the face fitted, that was a near miss because it was just a bump. If the face didn't fit, that was an accident because there had been a small amount of damage. And that was quite insightful when you actually looked at the patterns, and when you actually asked, but why is this, and what is the process? You know, it became apparent that there was bias. And they didn't really get that they were doing that. They weren't deliberately doing it. It was just the way they interpreted it on behalf of people that they knew. So it is important to be able to challenge, you know, and be able to verbalize that and challenge that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point there, Kate. And again, just with Amazon, I think we're recently seeing these headlines again around workplace safety issues in the US across 3 states. And last year, BBC reported an epidemic, what they called an epidemic of injuries, with 80% higher workplace injuries than their competitors. 5 out of 9 serious injuries per 100 employees. So yeah, Kate, what you say there is really interesting. And I'm curious to know what steps you think an organisation can take to identify these issues before they escalate to such an extent.
Well,
I think lucky. Sorry, Kate. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nick. Sorry.
I was going to say that obviously here in the UK we have the health and standards, HSE, you know, and we're quite regulated with it, from my understanding, and my only experience in dealing with workplace injuries is through an investigation done on behalf of, which is generally a fatality, investigation alongside HSE, and I think I don't really understand what the regulatory system is in the US to then enable those individuals to be able to have standards regarding health and safety. But that said, there should be a mechanism for it to be called out if it isn't there, and then for that calling out to be listened to and acted upon. So can't really offer a great deal in respect to what the US do, but most certainly in the UK, I think we are quite good in that sense. And I don't know from your side, Kate, you're talking about your forklift truck not behaving correctly, sort of things. But once something occurs like that, then all of a sudden the world and its dogs on top of it.
There were no dogs allowed. It's the thing with health and safety is, and I'm not an expert in health and safety, but the thing that I recognise with it is that it's never a problem until it's a problem. So the key to good health and safety, and actually the key to there's a lesson to be learned in terms of culture and engagement and what have you, is to be able to reflect and to be able to understand the environment or the process and have regular checks and have regular audits. Maybe audit is too scary a word. Maybe it can be rebranded to being a check-in or an assessment or what have you. But it's important to have a routine and have a culture of checking and improving and challenging, and for people to see that as a healthy conflict or a healthy challenge rather than it being something to defend. So I think that I would approach health and safety in the same way that I would approach engagement and getting the best out of people. Let's have an environment where that's accepted and people thrive in that environment rather than something to defend. And I think that's something that there's a thread there, I think, through Cricket Scotland and through Amazon. And it was funny because when I saw, it wasn't funny, but it gave, I had a wry smile when I saw the statement from Amazon, which was ahead of the review and the investigation into their practices. Their first thing that they said was, we refute this. And we don't recognize that this is reflective of our practices. And I thought that's quite telling, because an industry an organization that is open to be challenged would be one that would say, we look forward to seeing the findings. But I guess that might be the American side of things, where I think there's a culture of having to defend and deflect.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because like you said there, Kate, Amazon have denied that they use any type of kind of productivity quota for their warehouses. But then, on the other side, you've got the employees that are complaining of an increasingly aggressive pace of work. And, that word aggressive pace of work kind of again comes back to the expectations that are potentially placed on them to meet targets, to meet quotas, to get things turned around quickly. Otherwise, there's potentially a fear of disciplinary action. And I think kind of that's again what it comes back to, that investigation or disciplinary action, cannot be used and shouldn't be used as a threat to get employees to do work in a certain way or to meet certain targets. You've got to think about, again, how you create a safe place of work. So like you said, with Cricket Scotland, with Amazon, it comes back to creating that really safe place of work. But that's just not physical safety. When we look at the health and safety aspects of Amazon, it's a mental and physical safe place of work. So what are we doing then to protect our employees' mental health, their well-being? How can we create a place and a pace of work, that's a bit of a mouthful, that encourages employees to kind of work to targets and to get things turned around, as obviously Amazon has to, but in a way that it's not going to affect their physical or mental health. So, there is a huge amount there that Amazon could do and could come out with to say in how they support their employees, instead of, I guess, taking that stance of, we absolutely refute this. So say, what do we do? How do we support people? How do we encourage people to kind of bring their best selves to work and to work in an environment that really supports them?
And it's not easy, but often to hear and to get that challenge, I think it sometimes does have to be from a place of neutrality, whether that's preemptively or whether it's in a review. It's always good to get a third party aspect. to introduce new ideas or to introduce new challenges, or to feel comfortable in the first instance to make that challenge where perhaps people that are on the payroll might not.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think, like you say, it's really important that organisations are open to identifying these issues in the workplace. And we have a lot of clients that are. And at TCM, obviously, an investigation for us is the last resort. But we do offer a service at TCM, which is kind of a temperature check, a cultural audit to identify those bubbling issues, which we call a neutral evaluation. Harriette, I don't know if you wanted to talk about kind of some of the methods that our neutral evaluators use to kind of pinpoint or identify issues in the workplace.
Yeah, I guess we can there, but I think it comes back to, again, how kind of what we were saying earlier about creating that psychologically safe space. So actually, the investigator, whether they're doing an investigation or a neutral evaluation, they're creating a place where the employee can feel open to talk. And I guess through the neutral evaluation service, a really good way of doing that is through confidential surveys and interviews. So we've obviously seen with the Cricket Scotland, the review in changing the boundaries. That was a massive review that has produced a huge amount of recommendations for the industry. But what was important to recognise there as well is that actually they did go through a process of surveying, of reviewing policies and procedures, looking at the various frameworks within the industry. And that's kind of what the neutral evaluation looks to do as well. So it's creating those confidential surveys that does an initial scope of the issues, of the examples, of the themes that are coming out from the employees in a particular area or a department. And then it's creating an environment where they can come into a one-to-one interview with the evaluator, or potentially a focus group with the evaluator, and talk through some of those themes. So what are they witnessing? What have they seen? How have they been made to feel? And what would actually they like to see change for the better? So we're not just focusing on the negatives, but what could we do to improve this culture, this environment? And it works really well across industries. And if we think again a little bit about Amazon, so we did a neutral evaluation about a year ago for a large warehouse. And that was, again, where they were having issues with health and safety. They were having issues of things not being reported correctly, allegations of bullying, harassment, discrimination, just an unsafe working environment. And an investigation wasn't going to work within that area. It wasn't going to work for their colleagues, for the type of work that they did. They had a lot of agency staff as well. So that neutral evaluation process actually allowed the evaluator to go on site for a number of days, spend time with the agency workers, with the management teams, with the operational teams, do focus groups, and really understand actually what can we do to improve the environment in which these colleagues work in. How can we address the culture within this warehouse? And it came back with a huge amount of recommendations for them that actually they were able to put into practice. And that was really around kind of how do we address health and safety? What is what's actually an accident? What constitutes as a near miss? What do we do in terms of reporting safe systems of working? What do we do actually if we've seen or we've overheard something that doesn't align with our behaviours or our values, whether you're an agency or a full-time employee staff member? Yeah. So again, it always comes back to creating that safe space, whether you've got an evaluation or whether you've got a investigation. And I don't know if there's anything from yourself, Kate, or yourself, Nick, there, because you've both done, a huge amount of work within this sector. But, just I suppose about creating that safe environment for colleagues.
I'll let you go on that.
Very polite. Yeah, I completely concur with everything that Harriette said. And do you know what? It's not easy. It's really not easy to define a culture to implement the behaviours that support that culture, and then to maintain it. It's not something that can be done in a project, as in, you know, you define it, you get your vision and your values, and you define your culture, and you let everybody know, and then that's it. It's a constantly evolving bit of hard work, and it takes a lot of challenges, and it takes resilience, but again, if we come back to what the impact is if you don't do it, the impact is, best case scenario, you lose some business. Worst case scenario, somebody dies when it comes to health and safety. So it's it's important that there are people that are supporting this process and supporting this culture that understand how to keep it alive. So that would be what I would say on that. Now over to Nick.
I think it's very clear when dealing with and engaging with companies who've got various issues, and they bring you in as an investigator or wherever, and you're trying to, number one, create that neutrality, be totally unbiased, look for that neutral evaluator, should we say, to try and identify what the issues, but create good defined terms of references, strategize in your mind on how you are going to conduct your investigation, and work alongside the client. I think that's really, really good to have that step-by-step process, so that they understand, and then you create that trust sort of element with the client, so that you can work through their issues, whatever it is. And when you hit a brick wall, you're not hitting that brick wall alone, and you sort of engage in the client to be able to help you out with that. So I know that it's probably quite a broad sort of comment, really, but I just think that's probably a good top tip for me when engaging with clients, to then be able to get that end destination firmly put in the sand.
They need to be able to continue on as well once you've gone, so that's really important. That's why it should be done in conjunction with them, rather than sort of coming in and fixing problems and then going. It should be about taking them on that journey to be able to identify the problems and be able to resolve them and evolve and improve as they go along, with support when needed, but also to be able to do that themselves too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick, Kate, and Harriette. So it doesn't look like we've got many questions yet. So I'll give the audience a minute or so to see if they have any final questions or queries. But do you guys have anything you want to add on either of those topics or investigations in general?
Not particularly. I think Nick just touched on a really key point there of trust. And I think that probably stems through even to the topics we've been talking about with Cricket Scotland and Amazon with the employee side as well. When we're doing an investigation or a neutral evaluation, we've got to obviously have trust with the client to build that relationship and to go on that, I guess, journey in helping them kind of change or improve their culture. But actually, the employees that work for them have got to have trust in them as an employer. And in light of the issue with Cricket Scotland, there doesn't appear to have been that trust with their players, and then potentially across other members of staff, volunteers, and across the board. So, I think that speaks quite a lot for itself, that there's a lot of work to do to build trust within your workforce. And if we're looking at it through a lens of ED&I, there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done there to gain that trust, but then to keep it going. It can be very easily lost very quickly as well.
And I don't think these situations are unique to the sporting industry or to warehousing industries. I see similar issues in various sort of public and private sector institutions. I've done a lot of investigations in terms of education for the public sector, but also in private training providers, and you know, with both of them, you know, that there's the extra element of vulnerable people, and you know, usually young people. So, you know, it happens a lot where problems get kicked down the road, as it were, and kicked down the road because perhaps people don't want to address it, or they don't have the confidence to address it, or they just don't recognize that it's an issue, and it causes very, very large, complex issues that then nobody wants to deal with. So, you know, I do see it in different, you know, other sectors, perhaps not quite so high profile as Amazon, because it's a big name, and Cricket Scotland because it's, you know, it is it's high profile, it's, you know, a lot of people watch it, but I do see it in other industries too.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And anything from yourself, Nick, there? Any final comments?
Yeah, so obviously the recommendations that came out of the review at Scotland, and it talked about the you know, the lack of equality on EDI training for those involved, you know, a lack of diversity from board level to coaching, and I just think unless I know it's, unless we tackle society as a whole, unless we tackle culture as a whole, then things like these are just going to become ticky box things for those organisations. Have we, and sometimes it's slightly going to be about covering. Have we given sufficient input? Have we given sufficient training? It's about managing them. It's about monitoring them, about reviewing them. All these things, all these measures that are put in place, and ensuring that this behaviour is changed in a psychological sense, that we are getting a cultural drive to eradicate racism throughout the whole society, as opposed to, right, we're going to give you a list of ticky box things that you need to do. So for me, we just need to be able to show that enforcement, and then we try and reflect that within society.
Yeah. Okay, well, great. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to your insight on these issues and hearing about your experience and some of the things that you've picked up on and recognised in your own work as well. So thanks, Harriette, Kate and Nick. And thanks everyone that's tuned in to watch as well. If there's anything you want to discuss around our investigation services, please reach out to any of us who are on screen now. And I guess back to Jonathan, who is our content creator over at the Institute of Organisational Dynamics. He'll take over or take the baton back from me, and will be online for the next episode on the 9th of September. So thank you all again, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chloe.
Bye.
Thanks.